I'm going to hit the record. So, welcome everyone to the Sex, Love, and Addiction 101 webinar tonight. Normally with Dr. Rob Weiss, but he's on a plane to Asia. He's presenting in Singapore. So he's on his way there and spending a little time with friends in advance, a little downtime, which is great. So Scott Brassart, my colleague, and I are filling in. We do not pretend to be Dr. Rob, but we are well familiar with recovery practices, and we'll do our best to answer questions and share resources with you. So want to get started first. Obviously, this is not therapy. This is not a 12-step meeting. These are for information only. We're hoping that they give you some hope and some resources and education, but that's all it is. You're not required to be here. You're here of your own volition, which is great. We've not had any issues with anybody being disruptive, but we do reserve the right to remove anybody that is. This is recorded, and the sessions are placed on the website sexandrelationshiphealing.com, but you will not be seen. Your confidentiality is such that you can ask questions in a general manner. We ask you to hold things in confidence, treat it like a 12-step meeting, but we are not guaranteeing anybody's confidentiality. So that's kind of it. We don't really have a topic tonight, but I mentioned to Scott that I am fortunate that I celebrated my sobriety birthday yesterday, and I am always incredibly grateful. I always think about I always say the prior to recovery Tami and the after recovery Tami, and it's been a journey and it's challenging, but man, I have been so blessed. I was 21 when I got sober. I did not expect to live past the age of 25, and clearly I am much past that. And I'm not incarcerated. I'm a contributing member of society, and I have been given tools for living on life's terms, which I didn't know how to do just because of having the gift of recovery. I was on a forum, another forum. I'm on a couple of recovery forums, and people were talking about the struggle and relapse, and I'm grateful I have not experienced relapse. And I think it's just, I wanted this so bad. I wanted a different way of living, and I was just willing to do whatever it took that day. And I think I've always had the hope that whatever was going on was temporary. So as bad as it was in the moment, this too should pass. And I was grateful in the moments when things were going well, and knew that was temporary too. So enjoy the moment, and prepare for the next thing, not waiting for the other shoe to drop, but understanding that ebbs and flows. And I remember early in recovery, I was whining, and I was like, why me, and someone said, why not you? And that was a really key thing for me to understand is, bad stuff happens to everybody, and I'm not going to be in recovery and there for absolved from all bad things happening. It's going to be one of those things where all I'm going to have is support and tools in order to keep going. So, I don't have really a topic on that. We're going to answer questions, but, I just wanted to share, and I want to give encouragement, because honestly, I would not trade and this is one of those little cliche things, but, I would not trade my best day out, acting out, for my worst day here. I like myself. I have my self-respect, but I have respect, from other people. My family trusts me. They couldn't and shouldn't, before. And, just I don't live with the constant knot in my stomach, and the shame was horrible. The shame and guilt was terrible. So, I just don't have that. I don't struggle with those things, on a day in, day out basis like I did. So I'm really incredibly grateful. And I know, somebody said, do we think that, doing this, these free things, helps the business? my whole goal is to help other people who are struggling with addiction. And that means the person with the addiction and all their family members, anybody who's connected with them. It's really, it's so devastating beyond that. So, part of it for me is giving back. And I believe that, yes, I believe that our treatment center, when we open that, is going to be full. There's lots of people that need help. And, doing this type of thing, people will be aware of us. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things where I believe that Seeking Integrity, which is the business that Rob created, is about integrity, and it's about giving back to the community that needs it. So we hope that these resources are beneficial for people. We hope that we can help. We're not perfect. We're human. We're not going to be the right fit for everybody, but we do want to create a community where you can find, some healing and hope. So hopefully that's a little beneficial. So we've got some questions. Thank you. So throw the questions in the Q&A. We'll do our best to answer them. So first question is, what happens when a sex addict suffers no major consequences? Do they just continue their addictive behaviors and may consider seeking help when they have consequences? You want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Generally, hi, I'm Scott Brassart, the Director of Content Development. Tami's our reaching out and talking to people person. I can never remember your official title.
Because it changed, but yeah, Director of Relationship Development. How's that? So.
There we go, Director of Relationship Development. For those of you who don't know, I'm a recovering sex addict. I've been sober in this program since 2002. I'm also a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. Been sober there for a long time as well. Usually the defining criteria for sex addiction, there are three of them, or any addiction really. Preoccupation to the point of obsession. Loss of control over use, whether it's pornography or prostitutes or alcohol or whatever. Usually the best evidence is multiple failed attempts to quit or cut back. And then the third criteria is consequences related to the addictive behavior, the addictive substance. The question is, what if there are no consequences? Theoretically, if there are no consequences, might not qualify as an addict, but I would urge you or whoever you're discussing here to look a little deeper, because there are emotional consequences, there are psychological consequences, there are things that don't get done. Looking back on my addiction, some of my worst consequences were the things I didn't do. And, those are my biggest regrets. It's not the things I did do, and I do regret a lot of the stuff that I did do, but it's really the life that I didn't live. That was my biggest consequence. But to answer your question a little more directly, usually there are some pretty obvious consequences. People get arrested, or they get caught cheating, or somebody finds porn on their computer at work and they get a big old warning, and and that drives them into recovery. But there are plenty of people who enter recovery not just for sex addiction, but for alcoholism, drug addiction, eating disorders. The consequences are not so obvious, but they're miserable, and they know they have to change something in their life, and they realize the thing that's out of whack is their sexual behavior, or their drinking, or their drugging, or whatever.
Yeah, and I agree. Like I mentioned, I had huge shame issues. It was, I was living in constant turmoil, and, that didn't just magically go away when I got into recovery. But, well, first of all, I had to deal with the emotions. So it was actually really challenging. The initial recovery was harder because all of a sudden I had to confront all of the stuff that I wasn't, I wasn't dealing with. So, I had to deal with that. But, then I was given tools to be able to do that. So, so once I got, to a certain point, then, the freedom that recovery has given me, has been amazing. So I'm with Scott that, there may not be obvious consequences. He hasn't lost a job, hasn't lost a relationship, whatever, but, the crazy living and the secret and, and the deception, all of that goes along with addictive behavior. So, and sometimes people don't until there are major consequences. I was reading a story on one of those little things I was feeding today, and they were talking about like, here's a picture from then, and 2 days later I lost everything. And I thought, yeah, you took this snapshot, and in the 2 days previous, you're thinking your life is, I still am hanging together, and 2 days later you lose everything. So it's challenging. People don't have to hit the skid row, bum, gutter that that people naturally think of with addiction. Everybody's tolerance for living in the craziness of addiction is different. So hopefully the person decides to change before the really major consequences happen. So
I'll give you an example of my not so visible consequences that became visible much later. My mother, I don't know, a year and a half ago, sent me a box of photos, from whenever. And a batch of the photos, like, when you used to have them printed and they put them in a little envelope for you and give them to you. A batch of those was from Christmas. And I know which Christmas it was. It was the last Christmas of my addiction. And I'm there with my family physically. But I can see in those pictures in my eyes that I was not there. All I wanted to do was leave so I could go get high and find a prostitute. And to see those pictures, it was painful. It was incredibly painful to look at those pictures and realize what I had missed and what I had caused my family to miss. So consequences can be really wide-ranging.
Well, and then some people look at the photos and go, oh, the shame, I just can't handle that. And then, that's a trigger. We talk about triggers all the time, and, that's a trigger, and people can relapse. So, it takes, to be able to look at that and go, that was bad. I can see what it was doing to me, and I don't want to repeat that. I think that's a part of the courage of recovery. So good job, even though it was painful. So I'm a sex and love addict, only 5 weeks in SLAA. Great. I'm glad you're connecting with us too. I'm bewildered. I totally get that. I'm bewildered at my attraction to emotionally unavailable men. I think I get hooked on the challenge to crack these guys open, but of course I'm not laughing at you, by the way. I'm inevitably disappointed. Is there a pattern with sex and love addicted women, particularly being attracted to unavailable men? Yes. Thoughts?
Yes, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Addiction is an intimacy disorder. I was on a discussion group earlier online, and one of the things there was a person very new to recovery, and he was talking about something very similar, and I told him something that I learned a long time ago from Dr. Rob, which is sex addiction is not about sex. And the first time I heard that, I thought, what the hell are you talking about? But as it sunk in, sex addiction wasn't about sex any more than my drinking or drugging were about sex. I was trying to fill the hole in my soul, and I didn't know how to do it in a healthy way. So I reached out for non-intimate forms of connections, which took me out of my head for a little while and made me forget about the hole in my soul. But it certainly didn't fill it. I had to go to a lot of meetings. I had to make some friends. I had to find a spiritual connection to live in to fill that hole in a healthy way. And Tami talked earlier about she would prefer her worst day sober to her best day in her addiction, and I'm the same way. I would rather have a terrible day sober than a good day in my addiction, because my addiction was killing me.
I was thinking there was a song from Urban Cowboy, which dates me, I know, looking for love in all the wrong places. That was me. I was looking for love in all the wrong places. And, I agree that, I heard, Dr. Rob too, sex addiction isn't about sex. No addiction is about, alcoholism isn't about the alcohol. It's like, it's not just I love the taste of this. It's about escape. It's about taking me away from whatever and filling that void. And, like the problem is it never works. It never works. I was chasing what I hoped would happen, but it never worked. So you keep coming back. It gets better. It's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. Connect with healthy, sober people. And I think you're female. I'm assuming that. I don't want to make any assumptions, but Naked in Public is Stacy Sprout's book, and she talks about her journey as a female sex addict, and finding she connected with gay men for sponsors and other found some healthy women, and anything you can do that gives you a platform to talk about this. We're hoping to have so Scott was talking about an earlier meeting. We've got a men's drop-in group for male sex addicts. We're going to have a gay men's drop-in group on Wednesday night, and we'll talk more about that. But we're looking to start one for female sex addicts as well, so that there's a safe place where you can just go and talk. Rob also does a meeting in the rooms on Friday nights, and he has a lot of women that show up there and, and connect. Again, an online meeting is a safe place to meet. So hope that helps. Keep coming back. You can, I just want to add that the programs of recovery, SLAA is always a good one for women. Women tend to feel most comfortable in the SLAA, which is Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. But, the 12 steps are a program for kind of sorting through why we do the things we do and what we could do differently in the future. And also, just the work of recovery and being in meetings and hearing other women talk about similar things. You'll see yourself in them, and you'll see the solutions they've found. So yeah, as Tami said, keep coming back. You're doing the right things. Yeah. So next question is, what are some tips for a wife that finds it impossible to approach her SA husband who's in recovery for sex? And I would, with this one, I'd like some more clarification. Are you saying it's impossible to talk to him about anything or about his recovery? So if you want to add some additional information to that, don't you think, Scott? Or are you more clear?
No, I think a little more information would be helpful.
So we'll come back to that one, but I'd like a little bit more information. So Scott, what do you suggest when a husband continues to lie after painful process of disclosure? The lies from this SA are constant, ! He's been going to SAA meetings and is clearly not working the program.
You can't force somebody to recover. It's a sad fact of recovery. He's going to do what he's going to do. And you have to look at how it affects you and figure out, what you need from your life. You're doing something really smart, which is coming online and engaging with other people and asking for feedback and input. I hope you have a therapist where you are so you can go in and talk about that. I would suggest couples counseling if you're not doing it already. If your husband will go, and if he will be honest. There's no guarantee that an addict gets honest. When I came to recovery, I wanted my consequences to stop. I didn't want to get honest. Yeah. I didn't want to talk to other people. I just wanted the consequences to go away so I could get on with my life and do what I was doing. And it took me a couple more years of misery. I was in program for 2 years before I got any sobriety together. And that's horrible for a wife. I can't imagine what you're going through. Because the keystone of a good relationship is trust. And if you can't trust him, it makes it hard to have a healthy relationship, and it makes it hard to enjoy the relationship that you have. Please get support for yourself and for what you're going through. He's going to travel his path, whatever that path is. And it sucks for you, and that's not very uplifting. But what you can do is take care of yourself.
Yeah, and I agree. So we had the drop-in group for partners last week, Wednesday, and it was amazing. And I would encourage you to join that one, Brittany. It'll get posted when we're having the next one, but it would be a safe place to talk to other people and get support around that. But I agree with Scott too. You can't make anybody be honest. You can't make them do anything. So the add-on to so the question was, what are some tips for a wife that finds it impossible to approach her SA husband who's in recovery for sex? And it was to initiate sex with my sex addict husband. We are trying to stay together through recovery.
Tami?
Oh, so you're asking me. I was asking the question, so you. I mean, honestly, that would be one of those. It depends on your relationship. If you're able to have a discussion and can, if I'm having a difficult conversation with someone, including my husband, I try to make sure my voice is in a little more neutral and say, I have something difficult that I'd like to talk to you about. And I would just say, I'm concerned. I'm trying, I really care about you. I really want to have sex with you. And I feel like you're pulling away or whatever. Can we talk about, I just want to clear the air. The next piece of that would be, if you don't feel comfortable with that, or he's unwilling to have the conversation, then, a couple of ideas. One is Pat Love wrote a book called Hot Monogamy. And it's got a checklist in it, and you can and then you can compare lists, and you can learn about your beloved. And the other thing is, Bill and Ginger Burkhaw did a sexual reintegration workbook, and that is specifically geared to people who have experienced betrayal and are trying to find a path back to sexual intimacy. And so there are some exercises, and that was one I read a longer time ago, but I can't remember, holding hands or whatever, but it's like little mini steps, to get back to intimacy. And I should say, not even get back, to find intimacy, because often, the addict is, I think, probably concerned about having sex. Now it's intimacy avoidance, like Scott talked about, is, like, now you're trying to have intimacy with me and I'm like afraid of it. So, there's a lot of fear, having sex with someone you love in an intimate way versus, the sex addiction kind of fantasy, whatever. So I think it depends, but a professional, there are sex therapists or a sex addiction therapist that has a sex, well, I don't want to say sex positive, but that's a sex therapist that can help you, work through that. I think, any of those things, could help. It really will depend on what, if you can have that difficult conversation to start. So.
And I would add that, he's probably feeling as awkward as you are, especially if he's serious about his recovery, and he's probably really filled with shame. So sex is going to be hard for him, and the conversation is going to be difficult for him too. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have the conversation. You can start small. Hold hands, go on a date, go for a walk together. Just look into each other's eyes and say, this is what I'm feeling right now. What are you feeling right now? And don't have it lead to sex. When you start to feel intimate, emotionally intimate with each other, sex will come around. You'll know when the right time is. But have the conversation, definitely.
Yeah. And honestly, if it's someone you love, you've got to be able to have difficult conversations. That's the point of being in a relationship. And if you can't get to that, then there's a bigger problem, and then a marriage therapist to look at the underlying issues beyond the addiction, may be in order. So hopefully that helps. Next comments, questions. My husband has been a porn addict for years. He's been rageful and abusive to me. He's been diagnosed as bipolar 2 with major depressive disorder. Recently, he manipulated me into believing he has been clean for 2 years. Recently, I discovered a porn DVD next to his TV. It had no case, was all beat up with scratches, I was shocked with you were shocked with his manipulation. I looked up the DVD online. It was released in 2008. I think he's had it for years. So he probably lied about, the bottom line is, I think he's playing me big time. What do you think? Yes. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's addicts in general, when we're in our addiction, we lie, we manipulate, we keep secrets, we do anything to keep you from knowing the truth, because you might step in and stop our addiction. And the nature of addiction is sad but true, is it's the most important thing to the addict. I was doing things that completely violated my value system. And I couldn't stop myself. My world had to crash around me before I was willing to make any changes. And I played around with recovery, and we call it taking a dirty chip. I would take a chip for 30 days sober or 60 days sober. I had some dirty chips, and I'm multiply addicted, so I would get sober in one program, but be using in another. So I could take a clean chip over here, but we play games. The biggest lies he's probably telling are to himself. This is okay because I'm different, because, well, this person in my recovery program can look at porn. Your husband's a porn actor, he can't look at porn. But we lie to ourselves, and until we establish some accountability, usually not with partners, because a sex addict needs to be able to tell the truth to somebody without having his world crash around him. Sadly, the partner's always the last one to know. Yeah, I don't have any real advice. I mean, it's, again, it's what we were talking about earlier. You have to take care of yourself. It's very hard to be in a relationship with someone you're not trusting. And he has to re-earn trust. You don't have to, you didn't break trust, he did. So he has to re-earn it, if he wants the relationship to be what it can be. And relationships can be a beautiful thing. But they can also be incredibly painful.
Well, and I hear the pain, because there's a continuation of this, and you talk about it's broken the family, the children are distant. So you're living with somebody who's rageful, who clearly is in active addiction, and he's lying, he's manipulating. So, and I don't know your situation, and I'm not going to pretend to, but looking at the reality of it, you're living with an active addict, and he has disrupted your family. You said you're cut off from the children. That's an additional loss for you, because now you're even more isolated, and you're living with this rageful person. So I would definitely get support and look at all your options. And sometimes people do interventions. So sometimes there can be an intervention, and he could get help. I mean, it's what Scott was talking about. We're opening a program. That's the kind of person that a program is going to be necessary. Going to a weekly therapy session is probably not going to cut it. Just my observation. I'm not doing an assessment on them. I'm just saying that's been my experience. So So I hope he would get the help. I really hope you get support, because that's an untenable situation to be put in. So.
And that support is where you'll be able to sort out your thoughts about, what am I really willing to put up with because I love somebody, and what am I not willing to put up? Where is the line? And that way you can set boundaries and you can stick to them, whatever they are. And when I say set boundaries, that doesn't mean, if he does this, I leave him. But boundaries aren't about other people. Boundaries are about you. Boundaries, when I have a boundary with somebody, it's about what I'm willing to put up with. And I needed other people to help me really sort through that and to figure out, who I am as a person.
So there was a question about some of the books that I mentioned. So I just put it in the chat so you can take a look at it. Hot Monogamy by Dr. Pat Love and Sexual Reintegration by Drs. Bill and Ginger Burkhaw. I also mentioned Stacy Sprout. Sprout wrote Naked in Public, and that's a raw book, but it's a female sex addiction. It's a good book about her experience. Anyway, so hopefully that's helpful. So in a 12-step program, is it typical to repeat the step process over the years? Why?
Oh, you or me?
I'm trying to go back and forth because I always
that's a good one for you.
Okay. Yes, a lot of people. I mean, so people do things differently. I did all 12 steps multiple times. The first time I did my 4th step, I did the best I could, but then there was a whole nother layer. There is the original founders of AA were like, do the steps often. Every time a comer came in, they did the 12 steps with them. They sat them down, did the 12 steps, and then they would think of other things to add to their 4th and 5th step and whatever, and it would repeat the process. I live by steps 10, 11, and 12, so I try not to get myself into the situation where I have to go completely back and do, a 4th step over again, and haven't honestly for years. But in early recovery, yes. And would I be willing to? Absolutely. But I really do live by, 10, 11, 12, which are the maintenance steps. And I try to make amends promptly so that I'm not living with, I don't have the tolerance for having the relationships out of whack. So, if I make a mistake, which I do, I would rather own it, make my amends, and, move on. So, but a lot of people still do, every so often, almost like, on a kind of as a marker going, okay, I've been in recovery 5 years, I'm going to do another one and see if there's more stuff to clean up. Great. But, the steps are not one and done, and I mean, they talk about the first step is the only, in AA, the first step is the only one you have to do, perfectly, because it's stopping the addictive behavior. With process addictions, it's more challenging. With eating disorder, I had to learn to find a relationship with food that is different than the way I was living before. With sex addiction, it isn't about complete abstinence. With drinking and drugs, it's theoretically easier. I don't ever have to drink. I don't ever have to, to use drugs. But, anything else, I have to learn to have a relationship with it. So, so it can be a little different, I think, with process addictions than it is with, alcohol and chemical dependencies. So, thoughts?
I'm a big believer in the steps. I went through the steps basically twice, once when I was not sober, but in program, and then again when I was, serious about sobriety and wanting to make changes in my life. Step 4 for me is taking a searching and fearless moral inventory of your life. That was the big one for me, because up until then I thought I was a victim. And then I did step 4 and realized, oh crap, I'm an asshole. Everyone around me is the victim. And that was kind of the wake up call I needed to make some changes. But I have not had to go back and do step 4 again. I have friends who, when they have a major issue in their life, a friend, his mother died, He had a lot of feelings about that. He went back and did through steps 4 through 9 again. I have a friend who just got a really serious cancer diagnosis, and he had to go back and do those steps because he was so angry about it. And I don't blame him. But I'm like Tami. Step 10 is kind of steps 4 through 9, little mini inventory of myself, and what's my part in this? What do I need to change? Who do I need to apologize to? That's step 10 all rolled into one. I do step 10 every day, and I do 11 and 12 every day. Those, Tami called them the maintenance steps. Different people do it differently. There are as many ways to work a 12-step program as there are people in a 12-step program. So there's no right or wrong answer to that question.
Yeah, and I think, I found people that had programs that I wanted, and that's who I emulated. Those were the people that taught me what to do, and that worked for me and has, over a few 24 hours. So this is a great question. How do I know if I'm addicted to my addict significant other, or if I'm just sticking by his side through the tough stuff? There's a book called Codependence, Moving Beyond Codependency. Scott, you want to talk a little bit about that?
How do I know if I'm addicted to my significant other, or if I'm just sticking by his side through the tough stuff? Okay. Dr. Rob's latest book is called Codependence. We originally subtitled it Moving Beyond Codependency. Now we're calling it The End of Codependency. Codependency, that is an older model that basically says loved ones and family members of addicts, it basically pathologizes you as being codependent. And the theory is, the addict is addicted to a substance or a behavior. You're addicted to trying to control the addict's substance use and behavior, which is kind of bullshit, I think, personally. I talked to my mother when Rob was writing the book, and I was working with him on it. And I wanted her opinion because she dealt with me and never turned away. And her response was, how am I supposed to walk away from somebody I love? How am I supposed to walk away from my child? How is somebody supposed to walk away from their parent or their sibling or their child or their spouse or their best friend? How are you supposed to walk away? There's a book called Women Who Love Too Much. Really? Can you love too much? Maybe we love in ways that enable an addict and keep that person in the addiction. There are a lot of women who will buy alcohol and keep it in the house for their husband because they don't want him to drink and drive. And it's hard to argue with that. They're trying to keep their husband safe because they love him. There are a lot of women who stick with the man who's cheated on them 100 times because they love him. And if he is willing to go into recovery and make some changes and to grow as a person, he's probably worth loving. I don't know your situation, but nobody can tell you who to love or why you should love somebody or how you should go about it. Sure, set some good boundaries, try not to enable the addiction, take care of yourself. That's one of the things that partners and parents and family members of addicts forget, is they need to take care of themselves too. If you're not taking care of yourself, you're no good to anybody else. Codependence is Rob's take on it, which says, you can't love too much. You might be able to help in better ways, but continue helping if you love somebody. Stick with them through the tough times. You will both come out the other side stronger. There's a painting in my house. It hangs in the entryway of my house, and it's huge. It's like 8 feet by 4 feet, and it went through, in Hawaii, it went through a storm, and it was in an open air atrium area. And the hotel threw it away, and somebody picked it up and cut it down, and it's all crackled. When paint gets wet underneath, it crackles. You've probably seen old paintings. and reframed it in the original frame, but kind of cut it down a little bit because some of it was ruined. And it hangs in my house now. And when the hotel owner saw it after it was just reframed, he wanted it back, and the guy wouldn't give it back to him. He sold it to me instead. But you know, just because something has been through stormy seas doesn't mean it's not worth saving and keeping. It can be more beautiful than ever. You know, and that's kind of the pro-dependent approach. You know, love them, but you know, make sure you take care of yourself. Make sure you set some boundaries. But still love somebody. As long as you love them, keep loving them.
We talk in Codependence too about, you know, there might be ways to love them better, you know, that may be more effective with helping them. So I think finding some tools to use that might help the situation. You know, it's probably a crisis if you're loving somebody who's in active addiction. So there may be some tools that you can that can be shared with you that would be helpful in that particular situation. I also want to clarify, we tend to use he's an addict, she's, you know, a partner. I just want to clarify, it doesn't matter, you know, whether it's, you know, he's the partner and she's the addict, or a gay lesbian couple. It doesn't matter. All of these principles apply. And so if we talk in heterosexual terms, I just want to clarify that it resonates across. So hopefully people understand that. Okay, so my SA husband and I are 2.5 months into recovery. We're both in weekly individual therapy. Yay. When is the best time to go to couples counseling? My thought on that is when your individual therapists are, you know, I think that's one of those, if you're both in individual therapy, sometimes your individual therapist will do co-therapy with you as couples. So that's been a very successful model. But otherwise, you know, if there's a couples therapist that they are both familiar with, that they recommend, you know, I think that you each having those conversations with your individual therapists and see what they recommend could be the best idea. I mean, it's one of those things where it's not like you go, oh, at this day, you know, on day 91, you know, I mean, like there's no set recipe of like, it's, you know, it's all linear. It really is about, you know, what you're doing. And a lot of people also go to couples therapy to hold the coupleship. It isn't about fixing the coupleship, but it's about holding the space for the couple, you know, while they're doing their individual work. So it's really talking to your individual therapist, I think. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also add that at some point, the addict is going to need to do disclosure as part of his recovery or her recovery. And you are going to want to hear disclosure. And you really need to make sure that whatever therapist or therapists are overseeing that process, that they have a lot of experience with sex addiction disclosure, because it's a very involved process of preparation for the addict and for the betrayed partner. It's a very structured process when the disclosure takes place, and then it's a very structured process after disclosure where both of you have safe places to go, safe people to be around, you know, probably not the same place that, you know, for a night or two. So, you know, sex addiction is a tricky therapy business. You know, nothing sets off emotions more than sexual betrayal. So make sure you have some experienced people who understand sex addiction and understand disclosure and understand, you know, coupleships. Whether, you know, so wherever you do couples therapy, whether it's the two individual therapists overseeing or a specialized couples therapist, make sure they understand sex addiction.
So same person, next question, what's a typical time frame for couples working recovery to be able to healthily restart sexual intimacy. That one is, so if you haven't done disclosure, do you really want to have sex? If you don't have trust rebuilt, do you really want to have sex? Now, they use the 90 days of abstinence, and part of that's just to kind of restart the brain and let the sex addict, simmer down, quite frankly. So, but it's one of those, I mean, everybody's individual. There's no, again, not at 91 days, have at it. It really is, I think, talking to your individual therapist and saying, here's what we're thinking, here's where we're at. But I think I would want to have disclosure and understand, what was going on. So if that has not occurred yet, I'd have that discussion with your therapist. Thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, a lot of couples who are dealing with sex addiction or infidelity will turn to sex as the glue that can hold them together, because sex is and it's an emotionally bonding experience. But yeah, when you don't trust the other person, it is much less emotionally bonding. When you don't have emotional intimacy rebuilt with the other person, it is much less emotionally bonding. It's not going to be good sex if you jump into it too soon. So it goes back to what I said earlier about, talking, starting small, sharing your feelings with each other, holding hands, just watching a silly movie together,
getting foot massage, something, yeah.
Massage, yeah, that's, doesn't turn into sex, and let that be enough until you're both comfortable and you can both talk through it. You can talk through it individually with your therapist. You can talk through it together with a couples therapist or just with each other. When you go back into sex, it's never like it was the first couple of times, when you just met, but it can be really wonderful when you feel emotionally connected. In early recovery, that's probably not how you're feeling.
So next question. I've been an SA since 8 or 9 years old and find my brain was halted at that age. And due to that immature brain, I struggle with recovery. Any advice to get more mature mind? I got sober when I was 21. Same, similar. But I grew up in the program. I talk about that. I grew up in the program. Like the recovery program taught me how to be a functioning adult. So it will take time. Go to meetings, read the materials. It's people will teach you. The healthy people in recovery will teach you how to grow up. Right? I mean, you agree, Scott?
Yeah, a lot of people will say, it's particularly in AA, they'll say, I had my first drink and that's when my emotional growth stopped. I started drinking at 14 and I came into the program at 45 and I was emotionally 14. That's certainly my experience. I didn't know how to be a friend. I didn't know how to be a son. I didn't know how to be a brother. I didn't know how to water a plant. I could barely make a sandwich. Mm-hmm. And I had to learn all of that stuff. There's that book, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Well, nobody gave me no, I must have missed kindergarten because I had to learn it when I got in recovery. I had to learn all those skills, like other people matter and other people are important, and feeling connected is a lot more important than feeling cool or whatever. Yeah.
But all the tools are in recovery, and you will get there. And it doesn't take the same, it isn't going to take you 12 years to grow up 12 years. I mean, I became age appropriate fairly quickly in the program. So you can get there. I'm new to SLAA, SAA. My question, I tend to be attracted and to attract women who are emotionally and mentally imbalanced. Of course. Many of them have a variety of mental disorders, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, etc. I relate and identify with the characteristics of SLAA. I'm just wondering if there could be some repressed childhood trauma that could be driving me to continue this chase into chaos. Could you please explain about the intimacy issue?
Sure. In the book Codependence, Rob has a chapter called Twos Don't Marry Eights. And he talks about the movie, I'm dating myself a little bit, with Dudley Moore and Bo Derek. And, he falls in love with this woman who he's never even met, and she's completely inappropriate for him, and blah, 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 blah. It was funny at the time. It's kind of sexist and horrible now. But Rob talks about emotional twos and emotional eights, and he uses himself as an example in the book. He grew up in a house where 1 minute his mother would be loving, and the next minute she was running down the street naked with a knife, screaming somebody's trying to kill her. So Rob is hyper vigilant, which makes him a good therapist, by the way. That's his natural tendency. I had a similar childhood. I would come home from school and I would pause outside the door because I didn't know which mother was waiting on the other side, the fun one or the crazy one. So we're attracted to what we know. We're attracted to what we can relate to. We're attracted to our people. I had a traumatic childhood. I'm attracted to other people who had traumatic childhoods. It might be different trauma than mine. It might be different issues than I have. But I'm attracted to people I can relate to. If somebody shows up and they're wonderfully healthy and they want to bond and slowly and, do things like you're supposed to do them, I run screaming in the other direction because they're so boring. Oh my God. And that's just life for me. And I've had to accept that. And, of course, I've gone from an emotional 2 to maybe an emotional 5. And I think that's really good progress for me. So now I can bond with an emotional 5 instead of an emotional 2. And one man's 2 is another man's 10. So, yeah, you've probably had, if you're a sex addict, you probably had some trauma in your childhood. The vast majority of addicts had dysfunctional, neglectful, and or abusive childhoods. It doesn't matter whether you're an alcoholic or a sex addict or a drug addict or a porn addict or a shopping addict or whatever. You probably learned early on that you could not trust your caregivers. And this is where we get into the intimacy issue. Children learn as infants and toddlers whether they can trust people or not. If their parents are there for them when they cry and come and see what's up and comfort them consistently, they're going to be able to bond and attach. I forget, there's a lot of research on this in essentially healthy ways. The rest of us, we're either an island where we just stand off and we don't trust other people at all, so we turn to alcohol and drugs and sex and whatever, or we're a wave where we're like, come, oh, too close. That's me. And we can also turn to alcohol and drugs and sex and things that are very, very reliable when other people are not reliable. That's the intimacy disorder that I was talking about. I learned to trust pornography and not my family. Pure and simple. Because pornography, I knew what I was getting. When I walked up to the back door of my house after school, I didn't know what I was getting. Alcohol was the same way. I could trust alcohol. I knew what it was going to do to me. I didn't know what my mother was going to do to me. So.
Yeah, I think that's true too. When we talked at the beginning that sex addiction isn't about sex, any form of addiction is about escape. It's just about it isn't safe for me to be here, so I'm going to go somewhere else, even if it's into porn or whatever that isn't physically leaving. So yeah, I think exploring with a qualified therapist, trauma, but if you're early in addiction, into recovery, I'm new. Yeah. So so keep coming back, look for healthy people and get a sponsor, have them, it's denying your natural tendency. If you go to that person, because, they're the most, I always say the person with the Christmas lights on, I'm going, whoa, go to the other person, go to the person that's more neutral and healthy. But it will get different, and you can overcome that, that pull to the crazy. I don't want to say mental health is crazy, but the people that you're naturally attracted to, you will eventually be less attracted. You won't be able to tolerate that level of chaos. It will change. So
yeah, as you get healthier, the people you're attracted to and want to be around will get healthier, and not just romantically, but just friends and even people in program and things.
Yes. And so Codependence is on Amazon and Audible. Moving Beyond Codependency, somebody was asking. That is Rob's latest book. So a couple more questions. Is there such a thing as a high-functioning sex addict? Are feelings of shame hard to suppress for sex addicts? No, that's why we do addiction. So if we never stay out of the addiction, we're fine. So I'm just being facetious, but I mean, very compartmentalized. You could, like you were sharing about the photo, it's like, you're physically in a room with your family and you're mentally not in a room with your family. So
I was running a publishing house. I was getting profiled in magazines. I was writing books as a sex addict. But I had no life other than that. And I was miserable and unhappy. I really only did the work so I could pay the bills and do what I wanted to do.
So yeah, very high functioning, on any level, you can have a high functioning addiction. So they can be, that's why you see it all the time in the news, somebody that is in a high profile position and all of a sudden they're running off to treatment or whatever. And people didn't know, or some people had glimmers of it, but yeah, for me, it was all about escaping the shame, because that was the hardest thing when I first got into recovery, was I had to now deal with the shame. And then I had to find out that everything I was doing was typical of an addict. And, I had to come to terms with that. But at first that was, what I was escaping from every single day. So, okay. So this is a female sex addict. I haven't found a sponsor yet in SLAA. One meeting I go to is all straight men, and none of the women raise their hand to be a sponsor. I have a therapist and a good support from friends. Is there a way to go through the steps without a formal sponsor? I wonder about asking the other women, say, could we do this as a group? And maybe even if they are, because it's hard to raise your hand to be a sponsor. Like you have to be self-assured enough to do that. So I wonder about just saying, I wonder if we co-sponsor each other rather than, you're going to be a sponsor, but I wonder if we do this together. That's one idea. What do you think, Scott?
I don't recommend going through the steps by yourself.
I agree.
Without guidance. There's so many pitfalls and so many things you can do wrong that will really screw you and your life up. That's why people have sponsors to work through the steps. Group efforts of doing the steps are fantastic. I think there's a network online where you can look for a 12-step sponsor online, but we should look that information up and try and post it. Also look for some online meetings, and when we get the women's support group going.
Yeah, this makes me more motivated to get it sooner. So
yeah,
so
there are
watch
options,
for that.
but don't do it alone.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, a gay man or a group of, maybe even ask the other women, how did you go through the steps? And if they say, well, I didn't, then maybe we could do it together. So, take charge, be the instigator. But yeah, I agree with Scott. It's like so helpful to have somebody that's guiding you. And that's the point. So, okay. If my intimacy disorder keeps me from intimacy, then it's hard to get close to my wife. True. So what is the responsibility of the spouse that's the victim, so to speak? Wait, I'm getting the responsibility of the spouse that's the victim, so to speak, to connect to me, the addict, in an intimate and physical manner, even if she has been hurt and destroyed by my actions. You're smiling, Scott.
Yeah, she has no responsibility here. You screwed it up, not her. You have to earn her trust back, and you have to earn your trust in yourself back. And sex is going to feel weird until you do. Yeah, and you know, you can tell her how you're feeling, you know, and things like that, and what you're thinking. And doing that will build intimacy. And eventually, you know, she'll trust you enough that she'll want to be sexual with you again. But, you know, why would she want to have sex with somebody she's struggling to trust? That's the big thing.
And an intimacy disorder isn't a pass that you get to go, oh, I have an intimacy disorder. Check. No, it's like, I have an issue with this and I have to learn this. Yeah. So it's an opportunity for personal growth.
That's a great thing to talk about in therapy and in 12-step meetings, and ask people around you for feedback, because you know, you can talk a little bit more in depth than what you can do here, and probably get some really pointed and direct feedback.
Yes. Yes. I've had more than once where people have shared directly with me about certain things. So it was very helpful. In the moment I was like, what? But okay, so will there be an online porn addiction meeting? Yes, I'm working on that. We'll have drop-in group for people with porn addiction. So I'm working on it. All of this, there's a team of 4 of us, and we're all like stretched. So Umberto, who is on this particular meeting, is starting tomorrow with a Spanish language Sex Addiction 101 format. So if you know of people who have questions about sex addiction, intimacy disorders, he's going to go through Sex Addiction 101, Dr. Rob's book, kind of chapter by chapter, but it's going to be all in Spanish. So it will be a great resource for anybody who is speaking Spanish. I am really committed to finding somebody to be the moderator for the women, for the female sex addicts, but we do have gay sex addict that will be at 5 p.m. Pacific time on Wednesday. The partners one is going to be on a rotating basis. I'm hoping to add a second time because it was during the day on Wednesdays, on alternating Wednesdays. But we're hoping, Brittany Mangum did a great job with it. And I think she's getting married next month, so it may be after the first of the year, but we're hoping to add an evening time so that more people can participate with that as well. So stay tuned is what I'm saying. There's lots of opportunities. Tell others. There's podcasts. So, you know, if you're one of the people that's new in recovery, if you haven't engaged with the podcast, there's a bunch of information. I've had people that have emailed and said I was struggling, and so I plugged in a podcast. Great. You know, how much better is that than, you know, relapsing? So, you know.
There's 2 really good podcasts about porn addiction that Rob did back-to-back. One is interviewing a guy named Noah Church, and that one is live on our site this week. The other one, he interviewed a guy named Gabe Deem. It'll be live on our site next week, but you can access it now on iTunes or Stitcher or any of the other podcast sites.
Yeah. And these webinars, somebody asked about the webinar. This will be going up on the website. We've got, you know, previously recorded ones, you know, up there. Jonathan Taylor did one earlier today. Yeah. And, you know, that was on family of origin, really interesting. And he talked about eroticized rage a little bit. So you do take a look at those. They're rough recorded because it's just whatever you see here is what goes up, but it does have some good information in it. So we're out of time. Anything else, Scott, that you can think of?
No. Somebody asked if this webinar was going up. I'll try and get this one and John Taylor's up tomorrow at some point. It takes a little while for the website to update, but probably tomorrow at some point.
Perfect. So thank you, Scott, as always. I appreciate And next week, we've got Candace Christiansen will be guest hosting because Rob will still be in Asia. He'll be back in 2 weeks. But Scott will be with Candace. She's amazing. You will get so much information from her. She's got a couple slides she's going to share as well. But you'll really like. She's a professional. You'll really like her. And I'm going to be in Asia. I'm going to go to the conference with Rob, so I'll be gone, but I'll be back in a few weeks. So thank you all for showing up again tonight. For those of you in the U.S., happy Thanksgiving. And yes, thank you. Thank you to all of you that are saying thank you. So, all right. Night, everybody.
Bye, everyone.